if we take time to listen to every single thing Roger said, will give us hope. In times of crisis and in times of difficulty, for me, as a human being, a lot of the words Roger was talking about was being a human being. The pandemic has shown clearly the difference between life and death. I have never ever known anything like that in my lifetime until the pandemic, where you put on the TV and all we keep saying is the number of deaths, like they were just in thousands, human beings. But all of us here, each and every one of us sat here, we're still alive. There's a reason. Those who have gone before us, we are not better than them. But for me, I believe I am alive for a reason and for a purpose. And every day when I wake up, what I actually pray in my heart to God is, make me a vessel and value to my community and to others. When you're tired, rest. Share the burden. With volunteering, get a group of people who have the same will, value, thoughts, and likes as yourself, depending on what you do. Surround yourself with positive people. Stay away from negative. How many people know people that never have anything nice to say? It's always a gossip. It's always some sad story. And when they come to me, I'll say, not today. Simple. What people do to you is out of your control. How you respond is in your control. So when you're tired, listen to your body. Share. I have twin boys, and there's one thing I say to them every single day: share. It says, you share the womb, so don't come telling me mine. You always have to share. If you don't want to share, you wouldn't have come at the same time and they said, oh, we didn't ask to be born. I says, well, you are now, so share. So take the time to rest. Share with others. Speak to other people and say, I can't do this anymore. That's one. Some of us think we just have to keep doing it, and if you don't do it, the world will come to an end. That's not the truth. When you get to that point, listen to your body. Listen to your mind and pass it on to somebody or share the burden with somebody. But please do not burn out, because we want you to live longer than you are now. So that's all I can say, but keep going and have hope. It's the evidence of things that we haven't seen. Just have hope and keep going.
I think John wanted me to speak, didn't you? I think what we do is concentrate on the hope and look for the real positive things that happen in people's lives from the support that you can give them. These things might only be small, but they are big in that person's life. I don't think some people you can't measure success on, like getting a job and settling down and everything else. Sometimes you got to measure success on that person saying thank you, and I appreciate what you're doing for me and things like that, and the tiniest little bits of things that you need to really grasp hold of. That's what we sort of learned through the pandemic. But as we've just been said, it's that sharing. With working with across other services and with other services, we were sharing the pain together and sharing the challenges and the difficulties together, understanding how each other were thinking and processing things and spending that time to sort of talk. But the burden isn't just on that one person, like one individual, it's on the group. And it's about being truly open and honest to yourself and resting when you need rest as well. But taking time out for yourself and looking after yourself. But one of the key things for us and through the pandemic was just looking for the small positives, which are huge in that sort of situation.
I think for me, and if I could tell you two stories. One is that as a politician, I had to go down to London to represent the people of West Leeds. It was a great privilege. what probably most of you don't know what the experience is like, but I spent hours and hours in meetings and committees, and I'd go on a Monday and I'd come back on a Thursday night, and sometimes, you know, I'd voted in Parliament and only 4 votes for what I'd proposed, and that was just in my own party, you know, so you felt like you were banging your head on a brick wall. So you'd come home after the meetings and think, oh gosh, is it worth doing it? And what I did was, I thought, why am I doing it? Because the people of West Leeds. So I'd set out on my own on a wet night, on a Friday night, and I'd go around and knock on the doors and just say to people, how are you? And I always found that what gave me real resilience, really, hope and support were people. Go to the people and just randomly. And that's why I would come home from banging my head all week in Parliament to just go around the houses, and the people were fantastic and kept me going for 23 years. Now that I've finished, another story, I spent some time with a group of men who've got all kinds of challenges. Some have served time in prison, others have drug and alcohol problems, mental health problems. And we go for a walk every Friday because in Armley, in the towers of New Worley there, that we had the highest suicide rate in the country among men. So we got together and we meet in the cafe, we go for a walk, we stop in the cafe and have a cup of tea, we carry on walking, and we come back and have a meal together every Friday. I need that group, and I'll just tell you a story of why. One of the lads, we're crossing the bridge over the dual carriageway near the prison, and it's pouring with rain, and one of the lads says to me, and he won't mind me telling you this, he says, it was at the time, remember when we had floods in Leeds and Yorkshire, and we've gone over the bridge. Johnny said, I'm telling you now, he says it every other week, really. He said, John, I'm not coming next week because I'll probably top myself, that's it. All right, we'll just go get a cup of coffee here, so we go down. We went in this cafe in Armley that's called the Florentine, and it was wet and dark, and there was nobody else in. And then on the wall is a picture of gondolas. And one of the lads immediately starts up, sets about the proprietor and says, that ain't Florence, it's Venice. Don't you bloody well know where you are? And a great row breaks off in the cafe. And then somebody, to break up the rows, shouts out, no, it isn't, it's bloody Maidenroyd. The whole place cracked up, and I turned to Jack and said, I could see he was laughing. I said, you're laughing like a drain now. He says, yeah. He said, that were good. And he said, and I said, so what about next week? He said, well, you always have to remember, he says, there's somebody worse off than yourself, I'll be with you next week. And it was just, who lifts who? Who are the people that lift us the most? And I think that's why, for me, sometimes the people in the smallest corners with the least are the ones that might lift you.
I'd like to add one thing on a slightly different tack, and it's slightly drawing on what I was talking to Jo at lunchtime. And this was early on in the pandemic, so see if we can take the learning, and if it does help, about how you keep going. And we had some conversations with Leeds citizens and with a local vicar, Lindsay Pearson, and out of that conversation came what learning from other paradigms can we bring in. And Lindsay's done a lot with Christian Aid, and she said, first of all, when you hit a crisis, you go for immediate response. And you must, so you're feeding hungry people, you're rebuilding homes that are falling down, whatever the crisis is. And she says, as soon as that starts, and that's really important, you need to be thinking about your long-term goals. So she was saying, because you can't get into, I suppose, only reactive, you need to think about being proactive as well. And so that is actually a really big challenge. We set up a listening project, and we went around and we spoke to 50, for us it was church leaders, different denominations, genders, ages, over 3 times during the pandemic. And each time, when you asked them about their immediate responses, they were working hard, they were responding to needs, but they were actually appreciating the bigger picture as well. And they found it helped on one goal that was very interesting, and I think it relates to volunteering generally. Church leaders would say we've long talked about what we call lay leadership, so when it's not the vicar or the minister that does everything. And what we found is actually somehow we managed to achieve that long-term goal by meeting these needs because more people were setting up. So I think one thing we want to do, always fly the flag for research, so does Jo, but getting the bigger picture sometimes is also a way to help.
Yeah. I feel I might have spoken for you, Jo, but is there anything you want to add?
Not very much, but I think having worked on long-term kind of crisis-type situations in other parts of the world, one of the things that's been really striking about COVID is how unwilling we have been to look around the world and see where is this expertise, because it's not on these shores. But societies who have gone through, who live in situations of perpetual crisis, I mean, if you can have a perpetual crisis, you know, so I'd worked on the HIV pandemic, 25 years on, that is still a reality with long-term implications, and the social changes and the challenges are still there. So I think one of the things that I'm really keen to do is to get some of those voices from other parts of the world who live with this and have lived with these situations over the long durée to be resourcing conversations here. So that's just, it's a slightly separate point, but I think it's really, really important. We don't always have the expertise, but there are people in different parts of the world who do, and we have to stop being arrogant about where knowledge is produced and comes from.
Great. Have you got another question? Oh, there's two there.
Hi, I just want to build on what Abigail said and a few of the others, that I think we've all talked about doom and gloom in terms of the pandemic, and now we're obviously going to be facing another challenge with the cost of living crisis. But all I'd like to say is that, you know, the pandemic, cost of living crisis, yeah, we are tired, we're mentally tired, physically tired, but as Abigail said, we are vessels, and I think it's brought the best out of humanity. The pandemic, the cost of living crisis, the situations that happen around the world, we've been given that privilege to help the people in our neighbourhoods, and I think that's such a positive thing that we need to look at and focus on that, because there are people in a worse position than us. But we are privileged because we have got the means to help them. And if it's not financial, but other means as well, like the fact that you're able to talk to people and listen to people, meet people that you wouldn't normally meet on a day-to-day basis, give them your support, give them your company, because we socialise with our own networks of family and friends and colleagues and work colleagues. But the pandemic, we were meeting other people that we wouldn't normally meet. And you know something, that was positive, because we've built strong relationships, regardless of background, regardless of faith or no faith and ethnicity. We connected with people that we wouldn't normally connect with. So I think that's positive. And it does sound doom and gloom, but we do need to really build on that.
So maybe my question isn't quite as positively framed.
Right back down again.
It is a reflection of my personality. So I think we've talked about the challenges within communities, the strengths of the third sector in meeting those challenges, and particularly in regard to the community care hubs and the anchors, and the broader assets that we have within communities to meet that challenge. But we've also got to recognise that some of those assets are quite fragile, and we've seen that third sector organisations, despite being positioned at the heart of the response, are feeling vulnerable. Third sector organisations, we've been flagging up for a long time, have short-term funding. They have much lower rates of pay for staff. So we're not equal compared to other parts of the system. So I guess my question would be, how can we translate this positivity around what the third sector is doing to a more sustainable way of working?
One of the things that I think cuts are coming up here, and we're over cuts threatening the council again. So looking to the council to come in to support, it's going to look difficult if we're realistic about what was in the budget the other week and what's coming up in November. But I think we need to put pressure. I mean, often I think of lobbying and can we affect the politics at the national level and affect the difference there? You know, can we get a bit of a law change? Can we get more money for universal credit or whatever? Or even more respect for the third sector so that they can act in a way that they want to according to their mission statements and things, rather than be cowed because they're told they can't complain, you know. And I think what I'd be interested in doing is, and I've been reminded at the moment about the language change, you know, where told at the moment we can't discuss distribution and redistribution. Yet within my own religious tradition, within Catholic social teaching, the whole thing is about the common good. And it has been for hundreds of years, and the word redistribution has been key to it for centuries and centuries and centuries. So I want to claim back that word and not let it just be dismissed by the current politics. How would I do that? I think I would do it by saying, you know, we are talking about, I think the situations of support for people are our own families, elderly and children. So I'm tempted to say, how do we get towards the finance sector in the city, those with wealth, somebody mentioned it before, and say to them, it's in your interest to work with us and to share those resources, because we're the ones that be looking after with you, your children, your sick and your elderly. And we'll be doing it at the local level. So start to share and redistribute the resources locally. So I think whereas just to go to Parliament and lobby isn't where I'm going now. I want to get hold of the City of Leeds and not to say a rich person in Apple. I want to know what the corporate money sector of our city is doing that is wealthy. What are the stores doing that, I'm thinking there's a big report just last 2 weeks by the Taxpayers Alliance. And KFC and some of the companies aren't paying any tax at all on their meat import. Well, we want to pressurise them and say, can you make, because the people that work there, it's your families that we will be working to, providing the backup when the state has withdrawn. You need to pass over some of those resources, whether through VAL or Community Development Foundation now. And I think that is a kind of target that I would want to do in the crisis that's coming in the next few months.
What I would like to add here as well is, if I look at the model that we used in a Northwest, where I serve, at the beginning of the pandemic, so every third sector who was responding to COVID, we met every week to share best practice. At the same time, because we do know funding is really tight right now, we are saying all third sectors look beyond and outside of the council. There are lots of funding available that lots of people don't know. Connect with your local councillors. There are different funding pots within the council, outside the council, that your elected members know about and can help. Now, I always say, if you don't ask, you will not get, okay? So we've been running a food hub, now a food pantry, since 2020 April, and we're still doing that now. I tell you, almost every business name or contact that I come in contact with, I always ask for help. Help not for me, but help for my community, because I know via me, somebody else will be blessed and will be fed, and someone's home would have food or fuel. So what you need to do, and all the third sectors, I am encouraging you all to look for other funding streams, because they are out there. There are so many, John has just said to you, the amount of wealth, personal wealth that we have in this city, unbelievable. And some people do not know how to just get up and give. They just wait for you to ask. So if we have to have a course in asking, you know, somebody will teach us and train us how to ask. Honestly, I'll attend it. So build, do not be afraid, because at the end of the day, we are the third sector. At the end of the day, you can only give what you have. As much as your heart will want to give, if you don't have it, you can't give. So for you to be sustainable, we have to go beyond what we are currently receiving from the council especially, and go outside to the bigger funders and see what you can get. And do not be afraid, no matter how small. As Tesco will say, every little helps, but just ask.
I've been thinking today, listening for what we might need to know. What might research look like over the next couple of years? Where are the gaps in knowledge? One of the things that we talked about on our table with this, around this question of the role of business, and where is business today? They're not here. We're not talking to them. We're not listening to them. And one of the things that I think we really need to know, and it did come up in some of the research we did in the Crypt, who have good corporate donors, is what motivates business to give? Who do they give to? Why do they give? And what do they expect in that transaction? Because I think one of the things that I heard in the crypt about their corporate sponsorship was that there was an element of businesses buying a moral capital, being seen to be doing their bit for the, but what also, yeah, exactly, the kind of corporate social responsibility stuff. What also seems to happen though is you get these big flagship organisations that attract a lot of that attention. The crypt is an obvious one. It's very central, it's very visible, it's long term, and it's really dealing with the most kind of basic of the most vulnerable and the most needy. So I think there is also a role for a researcher. I think going to businesses, listening to what they say, what do they want to be seen to be associated with, who might they give to, why might they give. I definitely think there's a research role there too, which, if that's something that we think needs doing, that's something that we can do, isn't it, Andrew? Yes.
Any other questions?
There's one at the back.
Okay, so we've talked about research and finding out the information. We've talked about the issues of delivering and how we deal with the symptoms of poverty, really, and kind of inequality. With everything today, it's still difficult to know how we've networked, joined up partnerships, increased our capacity to deliver at a local level and our understanding, celebrating it more. But in terms of not just advocacy, but influencing beyond, because obviously we've just heard how there's no national funding. Do you mean there's no lifeboat coming? And I think, as someone who's been, delivering for a long time, I think that one of the problems is that there's been lots of legislation, like the 2 children one, like things about leaving care. The resources have come out of that. There's lots of, I work in the custodial sector now, there's lots of services that have been diminished over a period of time. So it's like we've actually set up people to be in desperate situations a lot of the time. So how, as organisations who are mopping up, catching the bodies further down the river, how are we supposed to feed back and have influence at the bridge to actually have long-term influence? Because we can ask commercial sector, they're under their own pressures from their stakeholders and from the kind of current trade situation. So how are we supposed to actually influence our national outlook in terms of our poor and in terms of our inequality? What is the route if you're in West Yorkshire for that? Is it the gentleman at the table? I don't know. Do you mean to kind of actually advocate and actually have influence beyond?
I don't want to, it's amazing, it's getting like America. If you use the word lobbying, it's a crime, isn't it? I don't want to diminish the need to lobby Parliament. And we elect people and we should keep pressure on them. But I think the way that we do it, we have to be more clever at the way that we do it and more... I'll give a practical example. With the citizens movement, we're looking at the strategy for the next election, and the strategy that we're adopting is, how do you tie an MP down like Gulliver? In other words, get the people to put lots of ropes around the person until they agree with what you want. So how do you do it? And I think the key is you need to make sure that MP responds to that neighbourhood that MP is elected by. So I wouldn't say do a series of meetings where one MP's lobbied by the whole city, but get at them from within their own neighbourhoods. But there are strategies for doing that. That's one element. But that is to change, and I think you're absolutely right, and there are things we can pressurise on now, and we will be doing. There was a conversation with Dave and some of us the other day about, is it Feeding Britain, Dave, isn't it? Feeding Britain, yeah. Yeah, and they've got 4 or 5 really good demands, including, I think, the 2 children one, but certainly on food hunger and sanctions and the rest of it. Some things that could happen now. There's pressure at the moment on making sure that the benefit uprating for universal credit, which goes to people, 40% of them, remember, are in work. It's top-up money because they're on such low pay, that rating will be in line with earnings and not the level of last year's inflation, for example. So there's that issue that's bubbling at the minute. But I think it's not just the serial issues that we need to change. I think the language and the culture needs to change, because I was minded with that passage in Roger's presentation. There is a way in which the whole thing is being pressurised back to people's problems who are poor are their own responsibility. In other words, push back to the individual. We're a very individualistic culture. It's your fault. Sort your life out. Go and get an extra job. I can't get an extra job. I've got 2 already. And I've got caring responsibilities, so I can't do it. Oh, it's your problem. It's not seen as a collective social problem of the society. And I think we've got to get back the word caring, and the person she's moved from there now, but the word sharing, I think you used it as well a lot. How do we get a culture that starts to use the language of the common good, of sharing? Dare I say, instead of having a row about whether we pay taxes or not, I remember once, this row's gone on a long time. One of the first contributions I made in Parliament was in 1987, and it was a round tax. It was Mrs Thatcher at the time, and you know, low taxes are a good thing. They're the best thing, and they bring about growth. And I says, oh, that's all right. There are 4 countries in Latin America with the lowest growth in the world, and they're among the poorest in the world. So it certainly isn't working, isn't it? And I remember getting hammered on the radio. John Battle's only interested in tax rates in Bolivia. But there's a real issue about using the word tax.
Yeah.
If you change it and start talking about a common kitty that we share into according to our means with a different language, that's a social and collective language. Now, the minute you come down that road, you'll get some of the hard right will say, well, if you use the word socially, then that's a term of abuse now, isn't it? But I think we have to find a way of claiming that language, of sharing, of a common kitty, where anybody could be as wealthy as you like. But if they get COVID, and one of their family needs nursing, then they're in the same boat as everybody else. And I think that is the message that hasn't come out of the COVID. But yes, I'm supporting the staff and the nurses, but not to say that we're all levelled by COVID. That proves that we're all, as it were, sharing an equal future in some ways. And that if we don't share caring for each other, we're all lost. And I think that is the bigger message of the language of politics that's not there yet. And that does connect to what Roger said about having conversations that don't just fall back into political ghettos, where you don't talk to the other side because you haven't talked to them for years, or the language is wrong, or you fall into tropes that are historically there. No, can we carve out a new language of caring and sharing that draws the whole society in? And that's a bigger work of, if you like, a real political leavening of society that we need to do, where people are just getting bits of information. Most people don't read the papers, don't get news, may see a bit on social media, but just feel crucified by what comes at them.
Thanks. That's, I'd like to link up with that a bit and think about the way that we talk about what the issues are, and the way that we practice speaking about our values, and the way that we learn informally together. And I think that that is part of how we empower ourselves. And if we only look on, say, let's not denigrate the media too much, but say social media, you can fall into thinking there are normal ways to talk about poverty or people who experience poverty. And we have to find ways collectively to build up our vocabulary and our learning so we don't fall into that trap. And when I say we, I mean Leeds. I don't just mean the third sector or the council. And so I think we have to commit to that. And a big one is us and them language. And we do talk about us and them. We need to think about our language. And on that basis, there's a series of podcasts called Staying with the Trouble, and I think that's another thing that we want to talk about. It's also about staying. We're all staying in Leeds, we're not planning on going anywhere. Actually, we're staying here. We know we're staying with the trouble, and you know what, we can hear from people in our community who've done it for decades, and they are resourcing themselves. What can we learn? So if we keep learning it, and if we keep talking, so we do reject, I suppose, like I say, the bad ways we talk about poverty, we're making one contribution. It's not the whole answer, and I think we'll all struggle to come up with the whole answer, but that's a thread I'd like to add in.
We'll have time for one more question. It's a different question.
Thank you. Well, we've talked a lot about cooperation and the need for cooperation, which is encouraging. However, it is the case that in order to be able to do that, we need to cooperate with people we don't necessarily agree with. So could I ask you to model some of the good practice by thinking back through the morning? Has there been something that you have found yourself to be in violent disagreement with over the course of the morning? And if there has been, how would you approach reconciliation? Or if that's too close to home, how about anything in the last course of COVID? How are you to reconcile with those you don't agree with?
Right. I'll just quickly, the last question, because I wasn't here in the morning, and in terms of how do you agree with those you don't normally agree with, okay? One thing COVID taught me, no matter your color, your religion, your race, your creed, COVID affected every single one of us, every single country. And for once in my life, I saw a city where anybody who needed help, they didn't care who you were. They were ready to get help from anyone. So at that point, over the last 2 years with COVID, I saw how, as a politician, from a party different from someone else, all of a sudden, all of us making decisions for the city in terms of what needed to be done were in unison. So sometimes, crisis, it's just like family. You will find brothers, sisters not talking together. Daddy or mommy dies, and all of a sudden, we all have to come together as siblings to put daddy down. And you have to agree on certain things. So out of the crisis in COVID, it brought a lot of us together in the midst of our differences, and we didn't even care who you were. All we were looking is to stay alive. We had nobody on the streets. For once, I never ever believed in Leeds we would have people off the streets. The streets were clean. Nobody was there. Everyone was afraid. When we heard the Prince had COVID, we were like, wow, if the Prince can have COVID, who am I? A disease that was no respecter of persons. And at that time, our differences didn't matter. So crisis actually brought so many of us together, even though we sat at different sides of the wall and different sides in the chambers, where we agreed on making sure we did everything we could for people to stay alive.
I think for me is doing good. So if someone or an agency don't agree with what they're doing, but they're doing good, then what harm will it do to try to understand why they're doing what they do? And if the ultimate goal is to sort of serve the people of Leeds and love the people of Leeds, then I think we need to sort of get rid of any sort of different ways of working and frustration that gets in the way of that, really.
I didn't have things that I disagreed with, but I got so much from what was said, not least round our table, that no organisation can do everything. Work out what you can contribute, collectively and individually. Recognise and draw on each other's strength. I thought there were some tremendous sentences there to take away. And I was disturbed by Chris, actually, and his comments on the Good Samaritan. As an MP, I used to go around schools, at primary schools, to give teachers a break on a Monday morning before I went to Parliament. So you went in and there was a church minister who had gone into school and he was reading out from the Good Samaritan. So he then said, "Why did the priest walk on the other side of the road?" And the little lad put up his hand and he said, "Because he realised he'd been robbed already." But Chris said, the Good Samaritan was not one person, it was a team of people. And I thought that was I've never heard that interpretation of the Good Samaritan. So it's how do I help one person? No, it isn't you, it's the team of people that you work with. And I thought that was the most challenging thing that I'd heard today, frankly.